This tower, this huge tower here, was built in 1360. It was made round in 1560. It was originally rectangular, but in the 1500s they realized that rectangular towers were not good against cannon fire, so they put a round shell around it. And the original rectangular tower is still inside that. Now the walls are 10 feet thick. No bomb or bullet could get through them, so they were used as shelters during World War II. And then we are at the start of the Nuremberg city walls here, which go around the old city of Nuremberg. There are 5 kilometers of them, 3 miles, and they're 80% intact. Nuremberg didn't, mostly because Nuremberg was broke in the 1800s, and they didn't have the money to get rid of them, to make room for avenues and railroads and things. And now the people are very happy that they are still there. Okay, you can see all these small little towers here. There's 74 of them going around the city walls. And then we have another one of the 4 corner towers here. These corner towers all survived the war intact. And he said, I'm not leaving my home country because of this little rat Hitler. And he said, something will happen. The army will take him down. He will be assassinated or something. And they cannot treat the Jewish citizens that way. It will get better, but it didn't get better. It got worse and worse and worse. And Jews were no longer even citizens after 1935. Had no papers, couldn't move freely, and if they wanted to get out after that, they had to bribe their way out. And that's eventually the Kissinger family realized that they had no future here, and they got out in the nick of time. His family is also from here. Billy was born in New York in 1947, but his dad and granddad are both from here. His granddad had a ladies' underwear business, which was taken away from him for nothing, not a dime, by a company that still exists to this day. And they also got out just in the nick of time. Is you see a very important building coming up here now on your right, and this is where the war trials were held. Just at Box Monstrosity here is the side building of the main courthouse, and that's where the trials were held. In the second floor, behind the trees, behind the flags there, and there's a scaffolding now in front of the building because they're renovating it again. Room 600 is where the main trials were held. And the reason, and you can see the main building of the courthouse here from the 1870s, 1880s, and people often think, why was Nuremberg chosen as the location for these trials? Is it because Nuremberg was a kind of symbolic capital of Nazism? And no, that's not the reason. The reason is because Nuremberg was the courthouse here, courthouse which was largely intact. It was hard to find a courthouse in Germany that hadn't been so badly bombed that it could be used, but most importantly, this courthouse has a prison just behind it. So the transporting of prisoners from their cells to the courthouse every day, to the courtroom, that was a big danger because of maybe fears of attacks, which didn't happen, but of course the Americans took every precaution that it didn't happen. And which was just built recently.
Prison and courthouse happened to be in the American sector. That's why the trial was in the American sector.
And just after the fire station, you can see the large concrete wall, and there's the old prison sticking out over the wall. That's a prison dating back to the 1880s. But the cells where the leading Nazis were held were knocked down in the 1980s and replaced by these modern buildings here. Prison sentences. Of the death sentences, only 10 were carried out. As big building here, there's a high school. They've got a good view into the prison courtyard. You can see the fights, the knife fights in the courtyard. On the other side of the school is a little brewery, and then another Audi. Mississippi, Nuremberg's Thames, Nuremberg's Rhine, We're crossing it now, but if you blink, you'll miss it. That's it. Oh, missed it, gone. It's called the Pagna. It's only a small river. Okay, I know.
9,000 Jews here
Rivers
when
were
World War II
the
started.
the
And
highways
they were
of
down
the
to
Middle
about
Ages, but Nuremberg's
1800.
river wasn't a highway,
And
just a small
when the
river.
war was over, there were
Only used
71 left.
Refuse,
Today there's about
industrial refuse,
2,000
toilet
Jews,
refuse,
most of them
and that all went
immigrants
downstream
from
to
Russia.
Fürth, which made this time. This goes back to the year 1234. That's an easy year to remember for history students. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's easier than 1776, isn't it? Peter Henlein, the guy who made the first pocket watch, very typical of Nuremberg in the Middle Ages, 1516. He made the first one. And that church there, little chapel, that goes back to the 1200s. It survived the war too. And you see all the gravestones
It's more like a garden.
flat in the side of the cemetery.
This is a cemetery. It looks more like a garden.
A stipulation, a condition by the city of Nuremberg in the 1500s that all the gravestones had to be the same size and all flat on the ground. This was to stop rich people showing off their wealth and death, but they did it anyway. They put kind of ornate bronze plaques or so on the graves. As you can see, this is still an active cemetery to this day. Approaching the city centre again. I
Buildings
just ran out of time to tell you about
they
the
were pretty well wrecked, but they look good today.
executions at the end of the trials there. As I said, only 10 were carried out. 2 were not. Martin Bormann was sentenced to death in absentia. They never found him. And Hermann Göring, he managed to charm an American guard into smuggling a cyanide pill into him, which he bit on 1 hour before the hangman was meant to get his hands on him. So he cheated the hangman out of his job. And he thought it was more honourable to die biting cyanide than to be hung. But so again, and the impressive city walls here. You can see they're much more impressive here than they were down near railway station. Much higher, the moat much deeper. That gate there is called New Gate, and the tower behind it, New Tower. Not that new, built in 1368. So it's not that new. Nuremberg was one of the most important cities in the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire, what was that? That was what Germany was in the Middle Ages, basically. It lasted from 900 or so until about 1806, but we're talking about in its glory days, in its zenith, between about 1100 and 1600. They coincide with Nuremberg's glory days. The Second Reich was the one that started in 1871 and went on until Germany lost World War I in 1918. And then Germany was a republic until Hitler started the Third Reich in 1933. It became, although this was a very Catholic area, a very Protestant city. And the kings didn't like that because they were Catholic and they stopped coming here. From 1525 on, Nuremberg was a Protestant city and the kings didn't like it anymore and they stopped coming here.
Ja, genau.